All right, so I had some time to sit down and play Dune Awakening. This is a survival crafting MMO based off of Frank Herberts Dune series. If you know anything about literature, it's one of the most talked about pieces in history. But I wanted to look at the game from someone who doesn't have a whole lot of time to play video games. Looking at it in short little burst windows of when I can sit down and actually enjoy it, specifically to see if it's good for working busy dads. So sit down, grab a cup of coffee, let's go ahead and talk about it. Make sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel for more caffeinated content. So Dune Awakening is exactly kind of what you would expect from a survival crafting game based in the world of Dune on the planet Arrakis, which is a giant massive desert if you weren't aware. You create a character and you go through a couple of cutscenes and you choose a class. Now, I will admit at first, the way that I approach most MMOs and games where you have like a meaningful choice like that, I was a little hesitant. Oh, which one do I choose? Which one's going to be good for me? I only found out shortly thereafter that it's really not that serious, because within the first couple of hours, you'll find class trainers and you can kind of like dual class all the way across the board, which is great. It takes a lot of the pressure and a lot of the stress of that initial choice out of the equation. And within minutes, you are thrown onto the world of Arrakis, the desert planet full of political violence, death, and giant tremor worms. It's a fun time. In a nutshell, your objective is to survive the harshest planet in the known universe and rise to power on the planet of Arrakis. Now, the caveat is that this is a living, breathing world. So even though you may log out, the rest of the world is still going on. The whole planet is active, including where you place your base. That is a living place where other players can go when you are not logged in. Now, granted, there are some restricted access depending on who you are allowing. However, it exists permanently in this place, even though your character is not on board. This also poses an interesting gameplay loop, as to protect your base from the ongoing buffets of sand, someone Tyranitar's out there casting Sandstorm, you need to be able to protect your base with a force field. You need to power it with fuel cells to keep the shields running while you are not logged in. Now, this goes even further to say that the game is ticking in real time. So when the game says you have 12 hours of battery worth of your force field left, that means in 12 hours, it will run out and your base is vulnerable to decay from the ongoing sandstorms. Now, from what I've seen, other players can't go in there and mess with your base or anything like that. But as sandstorms go past, it will slowly decay and destroy your base. The idea is that there aren't permanent bases on this game because they don't want players to basically get some really good spot, build up a huge base, and then never log in again. They want it to be a living, breathing, multiplayer world. And speaking of that, building your base on the rocky faces here on Dune is part of where most of the fun comes from, because that is essentially your crafting hub where you can go and build all the necessary materials that you're going to need to be able to survive this terrible planet. Now, what's really cool is that you essentially have the choice to build your base wherever you want to. And that's kind of what's fun about it, is that you can see other players' buildings from great distances because of how big they are, which is really, really cool. It's something that's always kind of fun to see as you are going through and exploring the world. But basically, as long as there isn't like an enemy camp, or there's already another base there, or it's like something very critical, you can build your base anywhere. Obviously, except for where the sandworms go. You can't build there. This sandworm will nom your base. So to start out, you follow the Fremen guide of Zantara and his little bat companion friend. We'll just call him Batman. I know that he's given a name, I completely forgot it. But you follow him along, he kind of guides you through the first like 5 hours worth of tutorials, giving you an idea of what you need to do, an understanding of the gameplay loop, and like where you need to go. And honestly, the story for this game is actually very good, 100%. It's good survival crafting, really good, interesting story, especially based here in Dune. So 100% do recommend watching the cutscenes, listening to what happened. But I do really want to tell you the best part about this game. Exploring the desert is without a doubt one of the best aspects of this game. It is just so fun, and it's almost like breathtaking how well they've done the universe, and they've created this environment, this atmosphere on Arrakis. Sure, combat is fun, the crafting is interesting, but seeing a giant sandworm breach like a mile away from you is wild. Just knowing how big that thing is and like a little bit of worry, like are you worried that it's coming for you? That's also where the fun aspect comes. And then the landscape under the stars when the sun goes down is just immaculate. There's so much going on. There's so much beauty tied into it. It is one of the better gaming experiences, the immersive gaming experiences I've experienced in a while. It was a lot of fun. Now, the exploration of the game really feeds its way forward. So as you are going through the tutorial, you learn how to kind of probe and quote unquote scout the area. So you shoot up the probe, it tells you all the intricate details about the nearby surrounding area that you can see. So it'll let you know if there's any enemy bases, if they'll let you know that there's like notable points of interests. It'll show you like the materials that are down and around and where you can exactly find them. Not just saying, hey, they're in this area, like a pinpoint out accurate point to say this is where you can get iron ore. This is where you can get copper ore. It's really, really precise, which is really cool. Now, when you go ahead and find these other points of interest and things like that, you essentially go and collect these items called intel. Now, you also get intel as you level up. So as your character progresses, you get them naturally, but then you also go to these different places and you gather intel as well. Now, the intel is essentially a currency used to unlock more crafting recipes, which essentially feed you forward into the game. So the more intel you collect, the different crafting recipes that you're going to be able to use, you're going to be able to craft newer items, which is going to make you stronger, which allows you to take on more difficult camps and points of interest. So it's kind of like building off of one another as you are going through. It's actually very fun, very straightforward kind of, we'll say, direction for the game. But what's really cool is that it almost creates like a curiosity gap. Like you want to go out and explore and to see all the different things because I'm like, well, what's in there? Like, there's got to be something in there. This is a base of some sort. Let's go check it out. We get into a fight with a couple of scavengers. Okay, I'm going to try to survive and then figure this out. Like, there's that want and desire to progress, which is really, really fun. I found it very, very enjoying. Now, in my experience, the combat is all right. I won't say that it's super in-depth. I won't say that it's super engaging at all times. However, I will say that it almost feels like it always comes down to melee interactions. So for the class, I chose the Swordmaster. The Swordmaster, again, was just melee, and I was just like, all right, cool, let's go in there and start swinging a sword. Now, as you progress into the game, you end up fighting more enemies who have these shields. They're called Holtzman shields, which essentially are a private protection barrier. And you can bypass the shield with slower melee attacks, which require you to essentially be up close and personal. And then even in that case, a lot of the ranged units will shoot at me, and then if I break their line of sight, they'll come into melee range anyway. So I kind of felt like the combat was just heavily oriented around melee and Swordmaster oriented, we'll say. But what's interesting is that the range combat was still very apparent. I always kept I was always strapped with a rifle ready to shoot enemies at a distance, because your shield can't be activated if you were shooting at an enemy, because then it would reflect, it doesn't work that way. So you have to deactivate your shield to hit another enemy at range, and they have to do the same. So it does create this kind of like trade-off back and forth. But I will say that it seemed like the cross-classing really ended up helping move the combat along, move the experience along, because you're able to pick up other aspects. For example, I got a couple of things from the Planetologist, which is more about like survival and, we'll say, living on Arrakis, as compared to the Swordmaster, which is 100% oriented around melee units, a melee attack. And you can mix and match as you go through, as you earn more skill points. So that's a fun little system. Not super in-depth, but interesting. And when you go and approach these camps, each one of the camps has a number of different materials that you can get. Fuel cells to power your base, but then also materials that are locale to that area. And the intel, or the probes that you send out will also give you an idea of what types of materials that you can find in those specific areas. Now, this really ends up helping the crafting aspect, which is immense, massive in this game. The crafting of Dune Awakening and crafting in this game is heavily reliant on the materials that you gather. So being able to gather as much and filling your bag to maximum is almost key because there's almost always a need or a use for these materials that you're finding. At some point, you will need them. The survival aspect of this game is multifaceted, but it also heavily relies on two separate gauges that you need to watch. You don't necessarily need to eat food, but you definitely need to watch your hydration. Your hydration bar over there and to the bottom left will slowly deteriorate over time. Now, if you have heavier like melee gear on, it will actually start ticking faster. If you stay too long out into the sun, it will tick faster. And then if it hits 0, you're dead. Basically, you died of dehydration. Now, there's a number of different ways that you can manage your water. You can gather it from little plants that are nearby. At your base, you can build a blood processing unit, which will process enemies' blood and make it into water, which sounds really gross. And I'm really glad it's just pixels on a screen and it's not actually me doing it. But the idea is that you are constantly watching your hydration and making sure that you are good and you're not going to dehydrate anytime soon. Now, you can also just straight up drink enemies' blood, but that also puts a small debuff on your maximum health, as well as gathering from the nearby plants only really gets you to a certain level of hydration. So there are other strategies, including still suits. It's Frank Herberts Dune. There are still suits that the Fremen use, which is oriented around gathering your sweat and urine to hydrate you. Man, that is really weird to say that in conjunction with drinking enemies' blood, but you do what you need to. That's what you have to do to survive. So let's go ahead and talk about, does this game respect your time? So in short, yes, Dune Awakening does respect your time, but only to some degree. Now, one of the biggest hangups that I personally had was the idea that my base would deteriorate over time if I didn't give it enough fuel cells. If there wasn't enough fuel to keep my base running, even when I'm not playing. Again, I'm a working dad, so I'm going to be taking times off. There's a very good chance that even like today, I won't be able to log in, but I want to have my base to be able to run while I am not necessarily sitting down at my computer and be able to be good to go. And that poses a problem because what happens if there's an emergency? What happens if there's a new game that you want to try and, you don't want to lose progress on Dune, but you also want to go off and do other things. So there's a couple ways that they can handle it. Of course, loading up your base with as much fuel cells, that works. I think the max time I saw was like 3 weeks that you can do at full max capability. So you would have 21 days of real time before you would have to log in and refuel your base. It should be plenty of time, but there are, of course, situations where that doesn't happen. Now, Funcom, the developers of Dune Awakening, solved this problem with a base reconstructing tool. So essentially what it does is it captures the entirety of your base and stores it. It stores everything that is in that base that isn't necessarily touching a rock. So if you put storage containers onto a rock inside your base, even though it's inside the zones, it won't keep that. It'll say that, hey, you will lose this if you go through with this. But it also it gives you the heads up. The idea of it is that it stores everything in your base into this tool. And from there, you can essentially just go and place your base somewhere else. So that actually helps out not only with the progression of the game, but also if you know that you're going to take a break for an extended period of time. Now, it does require a little bit of planning, and it's like, okay, well, hey, for example, Path of Exile's, 1.0 release is coming. Let me go ahead and store my base real quick because I know that I'm going to be playing the hell out of that. And then you're good to go. Your character doesn't go away. And the only way that you'll lose your base and all that using this scenario is that if you delete your character, which most players, I would imagine, wouldn't. Now, it goes through a couple of steps, and then of course it keeps everything, all the different materials that you've earned in the storage containers, as long as it isn't on the rocks. And also, to carry that a step further, most of your progression is tied around your character rather than it being your base. So your base is pliable. Again, it's a living, breathing world. They didn't want to make it as permanent as possible. But what's really interesting about that is that you will be able to gather all the materials and items that you would need to build your base fairly quickly. It really doesn't take all that long to be able to build a base. Like 30 minutes of gathering materials and going around, and you should be good. Now, granted, that works out a lot better once you have mobility, so like the sandbike, ornithopter, which you can get later, and that will definitely help out along those lines. But the idea is that you are basically able to store your base for when you're ready. Now, that only really comes with the idea of planning it. If there's something that's unplanned, i.e. your computer completely craps out on you and there's no way in heck you're going to be able to get to it, but you didn't save your base, or you couldn't save your base because how could you predict your computer crapping out? You might run into some problems. But in those kind of situations, yeah, you might run into an issue, but there are plenty of ways that you can save your character's progress. And then even from that, you can catch an ornithopter ride from one of the major trading posts to Arrakis, where you can just put most of your important materials into that base, and it's permanent storage, and that stays there as long as your character exists. So there are alternatives, not necessarily the simplest ones or the most convenient, but there are ways to keep your base and keep your progress. I'd like to take this moment to talk about the upcoming single player mode, which is coming later this year, September of 2026, along with the console release, where essentially you create a character and you have a private server for your character. All the NPCs are there, the whole mission, the whole story, everything is right there, including the deep desert, which is the end game. And you're good to go. That is your base. That is your place. It's fantastic. There's no need to constantly feel like you have to log in and to constantly keep your base up, because it is a private server for your character. And then from there, you also get a lot more customization. Think very much like in Shrouded, where you can create a custom server where you can adjust all sorts of difficulty sliders. So mob density, mob difficulty, experience gain, like there, you have complete control of that one private server for your one private character. Now, to keep that in mind, when you create a character on single player mode, you cannot transfer that over to multiplayer mode. At least that's what they have said in their recent update. So keeping all of that in mind, like there are options down the road that will make this game fantastic for dads, because then you don't have a guarantee. You don't have a push that you have to be on to be able to play the game. Really, really good. Something I'm very excited about. But when does the fun begin? Honestly, the fun for me really began within like the first hour or two. Like, truth be told, I got through the first hour or two of the game, and then I was like, I don't want to say hooked, but I was just very intrigued to see where it was going, to see where this story was headed, to see what progress I can make. And I was kind of just let onto my own devices. Now, having said that, you do have to go through some cinematics, you do have to go through some of the tutorials, but you can fairly quickly get that player choice where you get to go and explore Arrakis on your own and check out the different places that you can go and build your base, and different camps that you can go and explore, and mobs that you can take on. Now, I will admit it does, if you jump straight into it, there is going to be a lot of running early on up until you get your first sand bike, which will greatly increase your mobility, your move speed, and be able to cover a lot more distances. You become a lot more versatile. And then even later you get an ornithopter, which basically you fly across everywhere and you don't have to deal with sandworms really as much anymore. But the main idea of the exploration of this game is that there is the player choice, and that player choice happens within the first hour or two of you playing. So there's fun, 100%. There is fun ready to go shortly after you start playing the game. A lot of running, a lot of fun very quickly. But also important to highlight is the immersion of the game is really high, especially as you go ahead and start crafting and you've built your base and you're exploring and you're making your own player choices in a survival crafting game. The story's there to guide you. The story's there to kind of like lead you in the right direction. However, there's a lot of, it's not necessarily like mandatory. You can make your way through most of this game and most of this world, really, at least from what I've seen, without really progressing the story as much as you want. Now, again, I highly recommend you play the story. It's pretty good, but I will also say that you have a choice, and that's where a lot of the fun becomes with this game. It's just you have a choice to go out and do what you want to do. So is Dune Awakening worth it for working dads? Yes, but with an asterisk. The game has a lot to offer, and there's a lot of content that you can sink your teeth into. And it also seems to be fairly friendly if you are going to be like almost dedicatedly playing this game every, couple of days if you can squeeze it. I found myself being able to force in 30, 45 minutes here and there throughout my day. Again, I had to say force in because I gotta work gaming into my schedule. But I was able to do so fairly easy, and I was able to make meaningful progress within those short times. I was able to complete a quest. I was able to go ahead and clear out some of the areas. I didn't even talk about the little mini quests that are called contracts, where you essentially can get items and you can follow a quest chain that has nothing to do with the main story, but it's just your way working through this world. And there's like these little things that you can do on and off, and you don't feel obligated to do them. You do them if you want to. And that's what's really, really fun, is just that it's kind of like you're set off into the world, go and have a great time. Guess what? You can do that and have a great time in the 20 minutes that you have, the 10 minutes that you have, the 30 minutes, the hour. If you have an hour, you can get a lot done. But the idea is that you can fit these little windows into play and feel like you've moved the needle. Admittedly, starting out, traveling places without your first sand bike is going to feel like a chore. It's going to feel very slow. And I mentioned that in a previous section in this video, but I very much want to set your expectations right, is that you're probably going to have to run quite a bit to back and forth to different places. And that's okay. Again, it's a survival crafting. Typically they start out slower and then they build up very quickly, exponential in that regard. So once you get your first sand bike, then, you know, the leash is off, so to speak. And then of course, with the single player game mode coming up here in September, and that as an option, that is going to be perfect for working dads, busy parents who don't have a whole lot of time to game. Now my world is essentially permanent. Like, I don't have to worry about things rolling through and changing everything. Now, we don't know all the full details. You might need to still power your whole base with fuel cells, but I think it will only start ticking when you are actually live on the server, because that's when that world is open. I don't think that you'll have to worry about this constant need of having to log in every, you know, so many days to keep it up, because even though I'm not playing, the world is progressing around me. You do have these options, and I do think that that's the direction that they're going to go, so we'll have to see. But single player mode is coming, and that is a wonderful, wonderful bit of news for this game. So on the Caffeinated Dad scale, I'd give this game a solid 7. I would give it a solid 7, and when that single player mode comes out, I would even bump this up to a 9, truth be told, for busy working dads. But we'll have to see. Let's see all the updates before we jump in and fully say that it's the best game in the world. Now, if you do want to see a game that has a little bit more faster paced combat and a lot more, we'll say, engaging build crafting, you can check out my Working Dad's review of Path of Exile 2 0.5. As always, stay caffeinated, folks.